Hi guys, in today's video we're going to be painting a Mark 1 Forge World Rhino from start to finish. But before we do that, I want to say a huge thank you to my YouTube channel sponsors Goblin Gaming. Please check the description box down below. You'll find a direct link to Goblin Gaming's web store and you can go and check them out for yourselves. And also it's really helpful if you actually say that OPN sent you if you purchase anything from their web store. In today's video we'll be painting the Rhino using a mixture of the airbrush and hand brushing techniques, and we'll also be incorporating some really cool weathering techniques using some enamel based products. So guys, go grab yourself a nice hot drink and we'll get started. After building the Mark 1 Rhino, I primed it using Vallejo polyurethane grey primer. I left the primer to cure for 24 hours before painting it with subsequent layers of paint. Here I'm pre-shading the vehicle using Vallejo Game Air Black. I'm using my Awata Eclipse CS airbrush to pre-shade the vehicle. It has a 0.35 needle nozzle set and I'm still able to get some nice thin crisp lines whilst pre-shading. I'll put a link in the description box down below to this airbrush that I got from airbrushes.com if you're interested in purchasing it for yourselves. It's important to note guys whilst pre-shading that if you actually make a mistake with a line that's too thick or it's placed in a place that's undesirable, this can be covered up in the base coat stage, so don't worry too much if your lines aren't perfectly straight. Whilst pre-shading, I'm looking for all areas where natural shadows would form, so all the cracks and crevices, and where an armour panel meets the next armour panel would be an area where you'd want to put down a pre-shading line. The really cool thing about pre-shading guys is not only is it going to actually add a really nice shadow effect to your vehicle, but it also enables us to actually get some really fine lines down on the model without worrying about making mistakes, because they can be covered up later on. So don't be afraid to do the pre-shading guys, it'll look really cool and it's easy to do. I have now finished pre-shading the vehicle. It's time to add a base coat using Vallejo Game Air Magic Blue. It's important whilst adding the base coat that you don't place it down too thickly, so I'm working at about 4 inches away here and pulling back on the trigger ever so slightly to make sure that I'm leaving some of that pre-shading behind, and anywhere that I didn't want the pre-shading I'm placing down the magic blue slightly thicker, so you can control how much of that pre-shading shows through by placing down the base coat of magic blue. Now I've finished adding the base coat of magic blue, it's time to highlight the vehicle using Vallejo Game Air Electric Blue. I'm going to be pulling back ever so slightly on the airbrush trigger here and working on all of the centre of the panels to highlight with electric blue. You can also use a piece of paper or a bit of card to work on one section at a time. I'll do this in a moment, but I don't do it too much on camera as it blocks what I'm actually doing. Here you'll see that I'm just trying to highlight the very top of that panel line and using the paper as a mask. As you can see, I'm still highlighting the vehicle using electric blue here, just going around all those areas, highlighting any part of the model where I think a natural highlight would be, and also trying to leave behind the magic blue and the pre-shading in areas where shade would naturally form. I get a lot of messages sent on my Facebook page to people that are either completely new to airbrushing or don't own an airbrush, and they ask me how simple it is to actually achieve these results. And I've got to be honest guys, it's really easy and straightforward. Using an airbrush is nothing that you should be scared of or fear. I highly recommend picking up an airbrush and a compressor, and hopefully I'll talk more about this in a future video. But for now, know that all the results that you see here are very easily to replicate. please leave a comment in the comments box down below. Let me know what you achieve with your airbrush and how easy you find it to airbrush, or if you find it difficult in some way, please also let me know that. As you can see guys, just with the pre-shading, the base coat and the highlight, the tank's really starting to pop, and we haven't even started adding washes or weathering yet. I decided adding a second colour to the Mark 1 Rhino would really break up the colour and add an area of interest. I decided to do this on the hatch doors, and we're using white here. Now I've been using an airbrush for quite a while and I can get quite accurate with it, so I decided that I was able to do this without using any masking. But if you're new to airbrushing and you feel that you might not be able to control the airbrush to its best ability, then definitely mask this area using something like Tamiya masking tape, or you could use some Mascal or liquid mask from Vallejo, which would enable you to paint around the hatch doors without worry of overspray of paint. You'll notice, to make my life easier, I'm actually bracing my one hand with my other hand. This enables me to keep the airbrush nice and steady so I can get really accurate, crisp lines with the airbrush. Here I'm using Ammo of Mig's enamel wash. Enamel washes differ from acrylic washes in the sense that you can't thin it with water and you need an enamel based product or white spirit to thin it. The reason I use an enamel based product to wash the miniature, or pin wash it if you like, is the capillary action of the brush works much better. Basically what happens is when you place the brush down on the model, the ink will flow into all the cracks and crevices nice and easily. But the second reason I use an enamel based product is cleanup is so much easier. Once acrylic dries, you can't remove it from the surface, whereas with an enamel based product, using some white spirit and a Q-tip, you can easily wipe the excess ink away. So I'll show you that in a moment, but just know that I still like Agrax Earthshade and I still like Null Null, but I feel you'll get much better results using an enamel based product like this Ammo of Mig panel line wash. Again, which goes back to what I just said, I've made some obvious mistakes on this Rhino. Like you can see on one of the front hatches there, you can see some panel line wash that's not meant to be there. You'll see how easily it is removed using some white spirit in a moment. After panel line washing all the cracks and crevices and all the tiny details, it's time to remove some of the excess wash using some white spirit moistened on a cotton tip. And you can see how quick and easily it is to just go around the tank and clean up any of those mistakes or any of the excess wash that was made. And you can see there, just one quick wipe and that wash went away from that front hash. There's several ways that you can add chips to a vehicle. You can use a sponge, you can hand paint the chips, or you can even use chipping solutions with airbrushing. Here I'm using hand painting technique. This is the most laboursome way to make chips, but it can give you the best results, as you can literally create a narrative on the vehicle of where you think the chips and the cracks would form on the vehicle. So take your time, make sure that the chips are really small and to scale. If the chips are too big, they'll look out of scale and they won't look realistic, and it'll look like you've just chucked paint at the vehicle. So take your time, use a nice thin brush with a nice sharp point, and you should get some really nice results. I'm using Vallejo Game Air charred brown here, and as you can see, using the back of my thumb, I roll the bristles and the brush into a nice sharp point, which enables me to get some really nice tight, thin, crisp lines. Here I'm using AK Interactive Rust Streaks, which again is another enamel based product. This is a really strong solution, and I want to add rust streaks, but I want them to look in scale, so I'm only adding a tiny amount of rust streaks to some of those areas where I added chips earlier. We'll be able to make the rust streaks look even more realistic, coming back in with some white spirits a little later on and just stumping the colour with a white spirit to drag out those streaks and feather them out to make them look really cool and realistic. Here you can see I've got some white spirit in the little lid just underneath my hand, and what I'm doing, I've just slightly dampened the brush in white spirits, and I'm just pulling from the top of the streak down to the bottom just to feather out that rust streak and make it look more realistic, as what would happen on a normal streak, where the streak would be much stronger and prominent towards the top of the streak and then would feather out and thin out towards the bottom of the streak. It's important to note that I actually let the enamel based product dry for about 10 minutes before I started stumping it with the white spirit. Here I'm just adding some more rust streaks by AK Interactive, and just like a moment ago, I'll stump them with some white spirit and feather them out. I decided to add another dimension of weathering by adding AK Interactive Winter Streaking Grime, which is a green streaking grime. I add this towards the bottom of the panels and areas where I think natural grime would actually build up on the vehicle, and also on the white panel where I can blend this in nicely, and it'll add a nice transition from the white to the green of the streaks. Here again, I'm just feathering out that winter streaking grime using white spirit. Earlier on in the video you've seen that I was actually making the chips with a brush. Here I'm using a sponge just to show you that you can get good results with a sponge as well. Although it's harder to control exactly where the chips are going to be, you still can get natural organic looking chips really quick and really simply using a sponge. What I recommend to do with sponge chipping is to actually test the actual chip pattern on some paper before you hit it on the model. So if you think that the chips look organic and natural on a piece of paper, you'll know as soon as you start sponge chipping on the vehicle it'll also look good. You can run the risk using a sponge of adding the chips too thick and also not taking enough paint off on some kitchen roll. So experiment on some paper first of all, and as soon as you believe that you've got an organic looking chip pattern from the sponge, that's the time it's good to hit it on the vehicle. Here I'm using Vallejo Game Air Dead White to create some hard edge highlights. What that basically means is just on the very extreme edges of those hatches, I'm placing white around them. And although the hatches are white, because I've added winter weathering streaks and rust streaks, it's actually dulled down the white a little. And that dead white colour that we're adding now in tiny amounts to highlight certain areas are really going to make it pop and make it look 3D and cool. Here I'm using good old Nuln Oil to place a wash on all of the metallics that I've painted on the vehicle. So that includes the exhaust stacks, the hatches on the doors, and also the tracks. Here I'm adding rust streaks again to the other side of the tank using AK Interactive rust streaks, and I'm just feathering them out using white spirit. As you can see guys, adding weathering to the vehicle not only looks cool, but it's really fun to do. A cool tip would be to actually go onto Google and type in the search field weathered vehicles or rusty vehicles or muddy trucks, tractors and those sorts of things, and you'll actually see where mud naturally forms, where rust would naturally form, where grime and other different particles would actually build up on a vehicle, and you can replicate these on your own models, which will look really cool. I've decided to add more rust and more streaking grime to certain areas than others. So from panel to panel the weathering will change. This is not necessarily realistic, but it'll enable certain areas of the tank to pop more than others, which will naturally draw your eyes to those areas. Here on the back hatch of the Rhino, I'm using AK Interactive streaking grime again. I'm going around the vehicle adding AK Interactive winter streaking grime in areas where I think that the grime would naturally form, or areas where I want to draw your eye. Here I'm using white spirit again, just to stump and thin out those areas of winter streaking grime and rust, in areas where I feel that the grime was built up too thickly, or I just wanted to feather it in and make a nice transition. Here I'm using Vallejo Game Air Electric Blue and Game Air Dead White in a 50-50 mix. That's 1 drop of electric blue and 1 drop of dead white to hard edge highlight the tank. The reason we do this is it makes the panels really pop out and come alive. I make sure that the bristles of the brush is rolled into a nice tight point, and this enables me to get thinner lines doing the hard edge highlights. Again, back to the white spirit just to thin out those winter streaking grimes and also to add streaks. Here I'm using a Tamiya weathering master kit, which is super simple to use, guys, just to add some soot to the vehicle, so at the top of the exhaust stacks and also on the vents of the side of the Rhino. And here we have the finished Mark 1 Forge World Rhino. I just want to say another huge thank you to my YouTube channel sponsors, Goblin Gaming. I really appreciate it if you actually supported them, because they support me, guys. So please check the description box down below, follow the direct link to their web store, and if you purchased anything, please say that OPN sent you. Lastly guys, please put a comment into the comments field down below. Let me know what you think of this tutorial. Let me know what tutorial you'd like to see me do in future. Also, talk about the enamel products that I use in this video. Do you use enamel based products? What do you think of them? Or are you thinking of using them? Let me know in the comments field down below, guys. And also, please hit the like button if you've enjoyed this video. And I'll catch you in the next one.